Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've all heard those crazy stories about people putting the wrong fuel into the tanks of their cars. So someone who doesn't know that they're driving a diesel pulls up to the regular tank and puts regular gasoline in, or vice versa. That's a little bit harder, but we won't get into that. But I saw this headline, and I just thought to myself, this could be clickbaited so easily. Scott sent me a note from Yahoo News out of Australia. Melbourne workers $500,000 mistake at Coles Express service station. And what happened here is the guy driving the tanker truck put the fuel in the wrong tank in the ground. And because of that, they had to pull it all back out and clean the tank. And apparently that costs a lot of money. I worked at a gas station, and one of my jobs was to occasionally go out and stick the tanks. So they bring the fuel in by tanker, and they put it in the ground, and there's a cover over there, and you walk over and you pop the cover off, and then there's another thing you got to flip a lever on to get the second cover off. And we had this big, long wooden pole, and you'd run it down in there, and you'd pull it back up to see how deep the gasoline was. And that's how you roughly measured that. So in this case, Olivia Lambert wrote the story. A Coles Express fuel delivery worker has reportedly lost nearly $500,000 for the company after dumping unleaded fuel into the wrong tank at a station. Local papers report that the worker loaded 40,000 liters of unleaded fuel into the diesel tanks at the service station at Ringwood East in Melbourne on Thursday night. The worker reportedly realized his costly mistake and shut the pumps down immediately to make sure that no customers would be affected, because that may have caused bigger problems. The blunder was not rectified until Saturday morning when workers came to the service station to spend hours cleaning out the wrong fuel from the diesel tank. And I didn't mean to say that it's going to cause more harm per car than is happening here. I'm simply saying it would have made the problems get much worse. The paper reports that fuel delivery workers fill up the tanks when they get down to 10,000 liters. A spokesperson for the fuel company confirmed to Yahoo News Australia that the worker accidentally pumped unleaded fuel into a large diesel tank. The fuel truck driver quickly recognized the problem and followed standard operating procedure, which involved locking out the pumps. No contaminated product was sold to customers. And I've heard of stories about this around the country. It's often also water, that water gets into the tanks. And people will fill up a tank of water and drive a little ways down the road, and then all kinds of bad things happen. The entire quantity of the tank was pumped out and returned to the refinery, where it will be refined again and will be used. So the fuel doesn't go to waste. It's just a process that is expensive to undo, because they've got to, in essence, I believe, pump the entire tank out and clean the tank somehow, and then put fuel back into it. And the fuel they pumped out, they take back to the refinery and they refine it. So it's all cool. They didn't spill this all over the side of the road. They didn't waste it, but it cost a lot of money. So the diesel tank was cleaned out, tested, and refilled, and was returned to service within 48 hours. Now, of course, that sounds great till you realize that means the station's pumps were down for about 48 hours. The blunder was made amid expensive fuel prices across the country. We're talking about Australia, of course. It was reported earlier this month that cash-strapped Australians filling up the fuel pump paid an extra $5 a week, that's $5 Australian, over the course of the past 3 months, according to new data. The Australian Automobile Association's latest Transport Affordability Index found average weekly fuel costs across the nation rose to $100 in the June quarter. The fuel costs factor in the temporary halving of the fuel excise rate, inflation running at 6.1% annually, and global price shocks stemming from the war in Ukraine. The managing director of the peak motoring body said it was the first time the national weekly fuel cost averaged past $100 since 2016. 2016 is simply the year they started the index, hence that's why their records only go back that far. Despite the temporary excise cut, fuel prices are rising and continue to be a significant contributor to cost of living pressures across both regional and metropolitan Australia, he said. Average fuel costs were $98 per week across the nation's capital cities and $102 per week regionally, with motorists in Bunbury paying 122, Geelong 118, and Launceston 114. And the question is, did I mispronounce all three of those, or just two of the three? Bunbury, Geelong, and Launceston. That was the hardest hit at $1.14. The 22-cent cut to fuel excise tax is due to end next month, with the government strongly indicating it will not be extended. So that's what's happening in Australia. And like I said, I've heard so many stories about people putting the wrong fuel in their cars and the calamity that ensues. And here we have somebody putting the wrong fuel in the tank, but it's the big tank underground. And this is one of those things. I remember years ago working at a gas station, having somebody actually ask me, where does the gas come from? And I go, well, a lot of it comes from the Middle East, but we've got, oil wells, in America also. And they go, no. The gas, where's the gas come from? And I go, you mean like the gas that comes out of that thing there that goes in the car? They go, yeah. And I actually had somebody say, Steve, I don't think that pump can actually hold more than 20 or 30 gallons. I said, oh, there's big tanks underground. Oh, really? You laugh, but I've had more than one person ask me that. And they're huge. If you've ever seen them being put in or taken out, they're gigantic. But one of the problems is that the tanks, years and years and years ago, were not built as well as the tanks are now. And I can tell you that in Michigan, for instance, there was a fund set up by the state, the Michigan Underground Storage Tank Fund, something or other. And you could, if you owned an old gas station or a property that had old storage tanks on it, apply to the state to get the money to have them removed. Because what happened was a lot of people installed these old tanks, and when they got bad, a lot of people said, and just left them. Or they just quit the business and moved out. And so there were stories about people would buy a piece of property and they'd have inspectors come out and say, what do we need to do to build here? And they go, the first thing I do is get those tanks out of the ground. What's that going to cost? Oh, it's going to cost a lot because they were leaking. So you don't have to just remove the tank itself. You got to remove the tank and all the surrounding soil and haul that all off too. And that can be expensive. So the state had to set up a fund to help people get that done. And I actually knew a guy who owned a piece of property that had those tanks on it, and he went through the process, and he told me, he said, number one, he goes, I never would have believed how expensive it was. But number two, I wouldn't believe how extensive the work was. Because you think, oh, there's a bad tank, you pull the tank out. No. Bad tank, pull it out, and then pull out all the soil around it, under it, and they have to keep going until they hit clean soil. And the scary part is that I also know somebody who worked at a gas station not far from the one I worked at when I was in high school, where their gas tanks underground somehow lost fuel. And so you can put in gas, you know how much gas goes in, and then when you pump it out, you know what you've pumped out. And so it all should equal out like as a big algebra equation, right? And I was told by more than one person that this one particular gas station had the equivalent of inventory shrinkage. And that is that they'd put in 1,000 gallons and pump out 950, and the tanks would be empty, figuratively speaking. So they put in another 1,000, pump out 950, another 1,000, pump out 950. And they'd have these amounts of gasoline just disappearing. I don't want to use the word evaporating because in this case that would be misleading. They were just leaking. The tanks were leaking. And now, if you go by that spot today, because I know where the gas station was, there's no gas station there anymore. And in fact, the gas station has been gone for a while. The building is still there. It's being used for something else. The building is still there. It's been repurposed. But I don't think they ever removed those tanks. I think the tanks are still under there, and I suspect the ground is still contaminated. And my understanding is the MUSTFA, the Michigan Underground Storage Tank Fund situation, I believe that was done over. They got rid of that because they ran out of money. The fund went dry. So I know they cleaned up quite a few of them, but didn't get them all. And I know that I was actually looking to purchase a home. It's a while back, but was out looking at properties and was walking a piece of property. and saw some strange pipes coming out of the ground. And I asked the realtor, I said, what's with those pipes? And she goes, oh, don't worry about those. I said, yeah, but what are they? Oh, they're nothing. Well, there are pipes coming out of the ground, and you want me to buy this property. I'm going to ask you what they are, and I want to know what they are, and I'd like you to tell me what they are, if you know. And she goes, no, don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about there. And what's weird is someone I know who looked at it, who worked in a particular industry would know, said, oh, there's an underground storage tank there. And I believe the house had been on home heating oil or something a long time ago. And now there was just a tank down there, and the tank is just sitting down there, and someone's going to have to remove it, or, I don't know, chop those pipes off and hide it, but didn't buy the house. But when you're looking at a house and you see weird stuff sticking out of the ground and the realtor goes, oh, don't worry about it. Start worrying. But again, I told you I'm an attorney. I told you this just yesterday. I tend to think defensively and paranoid, so that's just me. It's what happens to attorneys. So Scott sent me the story. Thanks a lot from Yahoo News Australia. Olivia Lambert wrote this. Melbourne workers $500,000 mistake at Coles Express service station, putting fuel in the wrong tank. $500,000, but Australian. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. If you stop looking for happiness, you may find it.